Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here with L'Dor Va-Dor this evening for this important discussion in memorial and observance of Yom HaShoah. Tonight, we begin this evening with the lighting of 6 candles to remember the 6 million plus victims of the Holocaust. We mourn those who were murdered. We cherish those who survived. We honor those who served. Zachor, we remember. I would like to read a Yom HaShoah prayer written by Rabbi John Franken of the Harford Jewish Center in Havre de Grace, Maryland. To the 6 million, over 75 years ago, you were swept up by the whirlwind, yet always we remember you, and tonight we mourn. We mourn how you, brothers and sisters of the Jewish people, were stolen from us, and how your lives were stolen from you. We mourn what you were destined to become: writers, scientists, politicians and composers, parents, teachers, agitators, defenders, champions of our people. As we light these memorial candles tonight, we remember you. We honor your lives and your good deeds. We sanctify your good names. We light these candles and we bless your memory. And let us say together, Amen.
Amen.
I will now call upon some of our L'Dor Va-Dor members who will read a prayer after each memorial candle has been lit. I would like to ask you all to repeat, "We remember, we shall never forget," after each prayer is recited. The first person I'd like to call upon is Sandy Lopater.
Yes, you know.
We first remember the Jewish victims who were murdered in the camps of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Belzec, Chelmo, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and elsewhere during the Shoah. And let us say, we remember the Jewish victims of the Shoah, and we commit to perpetuate their memory.
We remember, we shall never forget. I'd like to call upon Wendy Frank, lighting the candles for the survivors. Wendy?
This is in honor and memory of my mother and her family. We also remember the survivors, our Jewish sisters and brothers who still bear the scars of this horrible event, but who have rebuilt their lives here and elsewhere in the world. Let us remember and commit to honor life.
We remember.
We remember.
We shall never
forget.
Okay.
I call upon Rabbi Martin Wiesel as I light the candle for the other victims of Nazism.
We remember other victims of Nazism, Christians resisting because of their faith, Jehovah's Witnesses, disabled ones, Roma or Sinti, gay or lesbian, bisexual or transgender. Let us remember and commit to respect differences. We remember, we shall never
forget. I call upon Suzanne Burstein for the 4th candle. For the victims of other genocides.
We remember the victims of other genocides, persecuted because of their origin, culture, or religion, and those who are displaced or exiled by wars and ethnic conflicts. Let us remember and commit to help. We remember.
we shall
we
never
forget.
forget. I call upon myself, Sharon Leibovitz, to light the fifth candle for the righteous. We remember the righteous among nations and the people who risk their lives for others. We think of the righteous who campaign today for human rights. Let us remember and commit for righteousness. We remember, we shall
We
never
shall never forget.
forget. I call upon Sandy Lopater for the sixth and last candle, for the liberators and the peacemakers.
We remember the brave soldiers who liberated the camps, those who served with the Allied forces to put an end to oppression, and all people who have devoted their lives to peace and freedom. Let us remember and commit to peacemaking.
We remember, we shall never forget. If we held a moment of silence for every victim of the Holocaust, we would be silent for 11.5 years. Horrific, unimaginable. At this time, we'd like to pause and remember along with the world. If you can, stand together in this sacred moment, made holy by our sense of the past and our vision of the future. There are times when silence has the loudest voice. Silence sometimes is the loudest scream. Silence is sometimes the greatest source of strength. Let us honor the Holocaust and the millions of victims with a moment of silence. During this time, let us remember and honor all of their memories. Thank you. I would now like to turn the rest of the program over to our very distinguished and special guest and Holocaust survivor, Ralph Mollerick, we are so fortunate and grateful for Ralph to be here together with us at L'Dor Va-Dor and for him presenting to us on this most holiest time. Thank you very much, Ralph. Give me a second to get Ralph set up here. Hey, Ralph, we're ready.
Good evening.
Hold on for 1 second. If you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the chat window by clicking on the icon on your Zoom screen and following Ralph's presentation. He will respond to these questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor to talk about my recent biography, KinderTransport, A Lifelong Journey of Survival and Redemption by David H. Herschler. I am Ralph Mollerick, and I'll be talking about 2 phases of my life as an eyewitness to the Holocaust history of my survival and my redemption. I will start with my survival. I recall with warm memories of my childhood good friends who lived in the town of Wolfhagen, Germany, where we played and raced our tricycles. They each recounted to me in recent times, Wolfgang, which was my German name, suddenly disappeared. They wondered, what happened to our little friend? Next slide. Oh, that's it. Thank you. Life for me as a child in Wolfhagen began to change dramatically for the worse, especially after passing of the Nuremberg laws in September of 1935. I was the youngest member of an extended family. My sister Edith was 9 years older than me, and we had a contentious sibling relationship in which she found joy in tormenting me. Next slide. I recall feeling terrified as the streets...
No, back one.
Back one. I recall feeling terrified. One back, please.
The Hitler Youth.
No, back. The Hitler Youth, that's it. I recall feeling terrified as the streets of Wolfhagen began to take on a different atmosphere, and I was unable to play with my friends. The Hitler Youth passing by my house is a photograph I frequently used when speaking to groups. Note the people in the left window. They are my father and me, and in the right window, my mother. It conveys fear in my parents' eyes and anxiety in my mind. In first grade, I was humiliated by my hateful teacher who made me stand in the classroom corner because I was Jewish. He did not allow me to do my classwork, verbally humiliated me, and I was not able to learn. My father took me out of public school and gave me a private tutor. I did not understand why I was being abused in school and in the neighborhood. My parents tried to shelter me from the worsening conditions around us. But I overheard conversations among the adults at home that were beyond my understanding and mostly taking place behind closed doors that left me thinking that something awful was going to happen. It was much later in life when I realized these conditions led to significant trauma. Next slide. Then we expected Kristallnacht, a pogrom all over Germany on the 9th and 10th November 1938. We had moved in prior year to Hamburg seeking greater anonymity, but I remained afraid of running into the authorities. I was not able to frequently go out of our apartment and did not actually witness the burning of our synagogue and the smashing of windows of shops owned by Jewish merchants, although I can still recall the acrid, dense smell of ashes smoldering. I did realize that something terrible had happened, but was too young to comprehend these horrid events. After Kristallnacht, we were terrorized by the Gestapo, who were looking for the adult Jewish males. I vividly recall one night when Gestapo came to our apartment, pounding on the door with their rifle butts, looking for my father. We had planned that if this would happen, he would jump into bed and pretend that he was very ill. The ruse worked, but this incident only exacerbated the effect of the traumas I experienced. Next slide. Just then, a few weeks after, Kristallnacht, a program of the KinderTransport, which quickly was established and changed my life. This historic rescue mission saved nearly 10,000 children, 17 years of age and under, by allowing us to enter England without our parents. My father was able to acquire 2 tickets and for Edith and me to be on the KinderTransport, leaving Hamburg on the 14th of December, 1938. Unfortunately, at the time, we did not know when and where we would see our parents again. I remember it as the ultimate sacrifice and gift of life from our parents. The very last words my father spoke to me were, my son, get an education, as that is something no one can take away from you, end of quote. Next slide. Prior to departing, I glanced back, looking for my parents. I visualized my mother holding out her arms, as if not wanting to let me leave. We departed Germany with great trepidation, knowing that Edith would have complete control over my life. Next slide. My journey as one of 200 children on the train leaving Hamburg, although scary, felt exciting, even though German guards made their presence known in bombastic ways. The ferry brought us to Harwich, England, and we were placed in Camp Dovercourt, which formerly was used as a children's summer camp. But in December of 1938, the bunkhouses were frigid. We were informed that eventually we will be assigned to foster homes or youth hostels, following learning English and the British customs. Conditions were unbearable. I felt lost and missed my parents. The British social worker looked at my sad face and told me, and I quote, to keep a stiff upper lip and act like an adult, end of quote. Edith helped me daily with both language and customs, and I quickly learned and complied with the camp requirements. Edith then impressed upon me that I should, and I quote, forget about the past and always look forward and never look back, end of quote. I took that advice to heart and never spoke German again until much later in life. But her advice had a profound effect on me because suppressing traumas of my childhood later caused me severe problems. Next slide. After being released from the holding camp in Dovercourt, I was placed in an Orthodox boys' hostel in the northern part of London. I lived there mostly with older boys until a month after the start of World War II. As a result of my sister's intervention, I was sent to Peterborough, October of '39, where I lived with a loving Christian family, the Jenkinson, for 4 years. I recall attending services at the synagogue on Saturday and Christian service on the Sunday. Next slide. The Jenkinson's family had a son named Ronald. On the picture from left to right, it was Wolf on the left, and that was my English name. Ronald in the middle and Mrs. Jenkinson on the right. Mr. Jenkinson was taking the picture. We became good friends and interacted like brothers. I remember the nightly bombing raids as we rushed to the street air raid shelter, with Ronald clinging to me, scared until the all clear sounded. My foster family ensured that I had the training to become a bar mitzvah when I turned 13. My bar mitzvah day in May of 1943 was the first time I saw my sister since leaving London. By then we had learned the year before that our parents were murdered in the camps, and so the day was especially bittersweet. Learning to survive without parents and with Edith in control caused me to take on a life with heavy burdens. Education in particular was a struggle while I was in England because I had fallen so far behind as a young child in Germany and because being in a new country. Nevertheless, in Peterborough, I had adjusted quite well to a loving family. Shortly after my bar mitzvah, Edith arranged to move me to a youth hostel in Northampton. Here I was, one of the youngest boys and often bullied. But one of my best friends at this hostel, Joe Haberer, for blessed memories, encouraged me to take my education seriously and learn as much as possible. I completed high school in Northampton at the age of 15 and physically prepared for working. Edith had moved me to Birmingham to further advance my education for technical training. I found an interesting job in Birmingham where the company president paid for my college education. It was the first time since arriving in England that I actually felt my life had a purpose. Then, much to my dismay, I learned that Edith and I would be immigrating to the United States. Next slide. We arrived in New York on my 16th birthday and were greeted by our sponsoring cousins, the Rosenthal's, who welcomed us to America along with the Statue of Liberty. We settled at our cousin's home for a short time, and after a few weeks, Edith found alternative but separate living arrangements for both of us in Washington Heights. I moved in with a wonderful couple, Henny and Fritz Simenauer, where I lived for over 3 years. They cared very much for me, like a son that they never had. I felt that I had it made. Then the unexpected occurred. I learned that my school records from England were destroyed during the war, and Edith insisted that I begin high school all over again. I was crushed. Thinking about this decision years later, however, recalling Joe Haber's advice that I should absorb all the education that I could, I realized that it was the right decision for me. I graduated from high school with diplomas in academics and technology. Following graduation, I enrolled at the Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute, now part of NYU, to pursue a degree in mechanical engineering. Now, many doors were opening for me. I became an American citizen in July of 1994. The same month, I met my first wife, Marlene. We were married 5 months when I was drafted in the United States Armed Forces. The basic training, after that, I shipped out to Japan for a 15-month tour of duty in the Army Corps of Engineers during the Korean conflict. Next slide. Upon returning from Japan, I completed my college degree in mechanical engineering and launched what turned out to be a highly successful career. Marlene and I raised 3 children, Jeffrey, for blessed memories, Sherry and Glenn, and moved to Maryland when the kids were young, and where I began a wonderful, highly successful 31 career with the National Aeronautical Space Administration, NASA, at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. The conflicts with Edith over the course of my life were challenging and stressful. My parents' request of Edith to take care of her little brother clearly weighed on her mind and no doubt caused her some resentment. Nonetheless, as I view her lifelong journey as my guardian, it became clear to me that she discharged her responsibilities with valor, devotion, and love. Thinking about it in retrospect, and despite my career success, conflicts with Edith and my relatives were but a partial manifestation of the years of suppressing my past and the traumas I experienced from my childhood. These traumas also caused significant challenges throughout my adult life that had debilitating impact on my marriage and my relationship with my children. After Marlene and I became divorced, I found myself truly on my own, deeply depressed, and searching desperately to understand the reasons for my troubles that had prevented me from finding inner peace. Following many months of counseling, I was able to identify the source of my anger the traumas, and losing my parents. I was then blessed to meet my current wife, Phyllis. We have been happily married for 29 years and now share 13 beautiful grandchildren and look forward to many more years together. Next slide. In 1992, my oldest son, Jeffrey, traveled to Germany on business, but also visited the town of Wolfhagen, where he discovered the home where I grew up with a unique Steinkammer concrete design and attached family business housing. He also encountered townspeople who knew my parents and me. He urged me to travel to Germany, and although I had never intended to set foot in a country that caused half a lifetime of traumas for me, with Jeffrey and Phyllis' gentle encouragement, I finally agreed to go with them to Wolfhagen in August of 1993. That event would forever change my life and set the trajectory for a remarkable journey of redemption that has enabled me to stand here before you today. So now for my redemption. That first visit to Germany in 1993 did not come easily. I asked myself whether I had the fortitude to face some of the friends who I had wondered what had happened to me. Would I walk the streets and wonder if I recognized friends again? How would I communicate with people who haven't forgotten my native tongue? These became my immediate concerns. I had conflicting feelings that summer of 1993, when arriving in the town of Wolfhagen. I tried to ponder whether I could muster up childhood memories. The town had not changed much, and wondered if the smells and sounds of the street were still the same. Were people anti-Semitic, or were they welcoming? The reality was nothing like I had imagined. When I first met my childhood friends in front of the Protestant church on Sunday morning, and on the next day when I was reunited with my best friend from childhood, we hugged for a long while, causing many tears to be shed. Our reunion gave me warm feelings inside. We were also welcomed with a reception hosted by the Burgermeister, the mayor. Several townspeople recounted stories of my parents as we sat around a large conference table, which widened my understandings of my parents and childhood. I listened to the stories about my parents, which I had never heard. They expressed concern for my parents, showed compassion, and indicated that the townspeople inwardly had respect for them. One story in particular of my mother, who constantly swept the business floor and dusted the display tables. The baker indicated that my father smoked a cigar and constantly flicked ashes on the wooden floor. Of course, that brought the broom out to sweep it up. The afternoon went well, and the stories were enlightening. My mind was focusing on the Jewish cemetery, which I wanted to visit. Next slide. Next day, we visited the cemetery, and I found it in deplorable state. The headstones were on their foundations, and only the monument to the 6 million Jews was clearly visible. This was not a simple task for me. I had to confront the Burgermeister, stating that I was appalled to find Wolfhagen Jewish Cemetery in such neglect. He readily agreed and would take the necessary action to improve the condition. Perhaps the most surprising and impactful moment of all occurred near the end of this visit, when I experienced an epiphany at a remote elevated hill overlooking the town of Wolfhagen, where the Offenburg Tower stood. Perched atop the tower and facing the town of Wolfhagen, I wondered what might have been if the National Socialist, the Nazi Party, had never come to power. What might my life have been like? Suddenly an image flashed before my eyes as a cloudy sky opened, allowing a burst of sunshine to shine like a laser directly on Wolfhagen. My mind immediately focused on life as it perhaps might have been or could have been as the heir to my father's business, marrying and raising a family. The vision conveyed to me that while I cannot forget what happened to the Jewish people, that I could forgive the people in Wolfhagen. These were the feelings I took away from the tower. I felt at peace, and a change came over me that everyone who knew me knows right away. This first trip to Wolfhagen led to one of the most fulfilling accomplishments of my life. I was able to plan a headstone in the Jewish cemetery of Wolfhagen, normally closed to further burials, in memory of my dear parents, with much help of the Burgermeister. The feeling of bringing my parents symbolically home enabled me to experience personal redemption and to reach beyond that to other milestones. We easily made friends with families from my childhood playmates, as well as many others in around Wolfhagen. During those first two visits to the town, I explained to my childhood friends the mystery behind my disappearance from Wolfhagen during the night when we left for Hamburg in 1937. With each succeeding visit, we enjoyed trips to towns and cities in Germany. Our friends opened their homes to us with loving kindness, offering delightful brands of coffee and homemade cakes without end. We also got to know the burgomeisters of the town and the deacons of the church quite well. And so we felt not only comfortable, but compelled to return to Germany again and again. Next slide. In 1995, we dedicated the memorial headstone to my parents with an unveiling. The three of us felt happy. Next.
Let's leave it there.
Including childhood friends in our joy. I was able to envision that the time was right for the town to undergo redemption of its own with respect to the Holocaust. Next slide. In 1997, I suggested the idea of a monument dedicated to all of the Jewish families that lived in the town prior to World War II. The town's council researched family names from old records for the monument. The idea took hold, and town's parliament's working group developed a plan over the next 3 years. The Burgermeister and I visited the town's quarry in July of 2000. I picked out a slab of German black granite and offered to pay for the project. It would become the town's milestone, and I was greatly encouraged by Wolfhagen's enthusiasm. The town dedicated the monument on the 62nd anniversary of Kristallnacht, 9 November 2000 in Freedom Square. It developed into an exciting event with school children included, and to this day, the monument is the final stop during the annual candlelighting procession held at the town's commemoration of Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass. With each succeeding trip to Germany, I was invited to speak to adults and students of the area, but the highlight occurred in November of 2003 when I spoke specifically about the KinderTransport to hundreds of people assembled in the culture hall, and also speaking to the upper student body of the school. It attracted the press, state dignitaries, teachers, historians, and many people who wanted to be part of this occasion. One other survivor besides myself were the main speakers. It was all about Holocaust, the many lives lost, and the part the KinderTransport played by saving the many children at the sacrifice of loving parents. Next slide. Then there was the question of Stolpersteine, literally meaning stumbling stones, that are professionally set on sidewalk paver blocks in memory of in many municipalities in Germany and other countries in Europe. These sidewalk bronze-covered markers became a bit controversial. On the one hand, they are meant to memorialize the people who were victimized during the Holocaust as a way of acknowledging a wrong that was perpetrated on the Jews and murdered by the Nazi regime. On the other hand, the Stolpersteine also perpetuate a historical fact that Jews had been trodden upon over centuries. I suggested the town of Wolfhagen memorialize the Holocaust victims with a plaque mounted on the wall of the homes where they once occupied. Next slide. Each year since 2008, a former Jewish home is dedicated with a plaque. My parents' home was dedicated with a plaque on the anniversary of Kristallnacht in 2009. I witnessed yet another noteworthy project undertaken in nearby town Volkmar in Germany, which portrays the history of Jewish communities and the cultures in the Hessen region of central Germany, both for educational and historical purposes. While I had nothing to do with the initiation of this award-winning project, which was established and operated by Ernst Klein and his council, it has everything to do with providing eyewitness accounts to the students who learned about the lives of Jewish families and communities who once lived in the region, and is exhibited in his Academy Museum. The story of my parents and my involvement is part of the exhibit, and I have spoken to the student groups Mr. Klein has brought to his exhibit on many of my visits over to Germany over the past 2 decades. Teaching the lessons of the Holocaust has provided me with truly rewarding moments. What can I say about my personal experience working with the author to produce this beautifully written account of my life? My story is a sad but human account, strewn with often gut-wrenching moments, interlaced with interpersonal conflicts and challenges that I somehow overcame. In that respect, my life story truly represents tragedy and triumph, a victory over the human spirit, over consequences perpetrated by some of the worst evil that the world has ever witnessed. Next slide. This is what the author, as historian, found in my lifelong journey of survival and redemption, and why our collaboration on the research was so meaningful to me. My KinderTransport journey, together with my sister, with our parents sent us to a safer land and not been able to save themselves, is a tale for tearful eyes. The book is compelling and tells a unique story of my journey and the redemption achieved. I would like to read 2 paragraphs from the book pertaining to 2 questions asked of me. The first is of the author, and the second from the Protestant minister of Wolfhagen. The first paragraph, and I quote, "In response to a question of why it is so important to remember such days as November the 9th, 1938, Ralph explained it this way, and I quote, "It is most important to continue to tell the stories of the awful persecution of the Jewish people during the Holocaust era. Every child must know that intolerance and hate must be recognized and acted upon at all levels of our society so that it will never happen again. I'm so proud of the wonderful people of Wolfhagen who stood together and erected a monument in the center of town in memory of the Jewish families who once lived in Wolfhagen prior to the Holocaust era. My thoughts and spirit will be with the people in the town in the 70th commemoration day coming up November the 9th of 2008. End of quote. Second paragraph, and I quote, "The request of Deacon Gerlach of the Protestant Church, Ralph sent a personal message and prayer that was read during the service." And I'll quote, "As we progress in life, we must not hold our memories anchored to the evils that were committed in the past. The present is now, and life is for us to live and enjoy. As we pray, may we find relief in our hearts and minds, that forgiveness can be found and that peace can be achieved." End of quote. Its lesson forms my concluding words each time I tell the story. I survived, I'm alive, I brought my parents symbolically home, and life is meant to be lived to the fullest. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for that. And
My pleasure.
it was wonderful. It was really wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Ralph? I will allow you to unmute yourselves. If you can raise your hand, I will call upon you. Okay, Valerie. Oh, wait, unmute yourself, Valerie.
Okay. Is your sister still alive and living in the United States?
My sister unfortunately passed away shortly after we came to the United States. She had MS shortly after giving birth to a child. And I remember very dearly that she was so concerned and frequently asked if I was content, happy, and settled. And I always told her how thankful I was, and I was able to do that before she passed away in 1987.
Our heart goes out to you. Sorry, Ralph.
Thank you.
Hannah, go ahead.
Yeah, my condolences. She was quite a supportive sister. I noticed on the stone that was engraved that it said LODZ, and I know they don't pronounce it loads, they pronounce it something else, but
Right.
That's where my family came from. And I have keep saying that I want to do some more research about the family. You know I have an aunt who passed away recently, and her family was French, and her parents were in the concentration camps. Her father survived, her mother did not.
Yeah.
But I think maybe sometime I should really start looking into the history of where they came from.
Yes, LODG is pronounced Lodge,
Lodge.
and it's a ghetto in Poland. Most of the people that were taken by the Nazis were mostly taken to Lodge first, and from there they were sent to Auschwitz, where they were beaten and tortured and worked practically to death.
Well,
And
so
my parents-
Lodge was not a town. It was a.
Yes,
It was a town. It was a town. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read a lot of
was a ghetto.
Holocaust books, and I really feel like I need to find out a little more about where they originated from.
Thank
Ralph,
you.
thank you very much. Thank you for your story. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy, go ahead, unmute yourself. Wendy Frank.
Nice to meet you, Ralph. I'm from a family of Holocaust survivors. My mother had 7 siblings, 5 of whom survived, and most of them married survivors from all over Eastern Europe and Russia. Nobody has a story like yours where they went back and everybody was that nice to them. The people I know that went back, people were scared when they tried to find their homes. The townspeople were scared that they were going to want to reclaim their original home. This was happening in Hungary, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia. I don't know if your story is what it is, because Germany, after the war, had such a turnaround.
I do recall and can relate to visiting my town and knocking on the door where I used to live in Wolfhagen. And what the lady uttered, the first words out of her mouth was, "Are you here to claim your house?" And I said, "Of course not. I'm here to find out the history, to do my roots here. And I have no interest in any real estate here, although my father had several homes here and land that was used for gardening. I don't want any of it. I just want to see the people. I want to know how the town progressed. I want to know what they feel about the horrors that took place, and they remained silent. And I got some feedback from some of them, and they mostly said the people were just dragged out of the house and we were so helpless. And I said, yes, but you didn't say anything, not even the churches, nothing. And they said we couldn't, because if we did, we were picked up along with the Jewish people and taken to Lodz, and then from there to one of the concentration camps. So we didn't have the opportunity to really find out what the people really felt at the time when the Nazis were going from house to house looking for the Jews.
Wow,
I must
thank you, Ralph.
also say how well you look, because you have to be 90 or close to 90. So
That's
very
right.
impressed how good you look for everything you've been through.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was a little kid when I left, and I was one of the youngest on the transport. So I guess that was in my favor, but unfortunately, at a big sacrifice, having lost my parents.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? If you're not on my panel.
My grandfather fled Lodz in 1905 from the pogroms when he was 5 years old to come to the United States. So apparently that part of the world has had conflicts for the Jews for a very, very long time.
Right.
That's right. There's a lot written about the Lodz area, particularly what people felt that lived, in that vicinity, in that city. And I try to find some people who got some feedback. I wasn't successful. So I hope that whoever wants to investigate Lodz and what it stood for and what happened there, good luck. It is available, but it's hard to find.
I see Rabbi Barry is on. Rabbi, would you like to say anything?
First of all, I want to thank you, Ralph. You are very stalwart and you're looking really good. So
Thank you.
you must be eating well and exercising and taking good care of yourself. I compliment you. You're in very good shape. And you're a great articulate spokesperson for what happened. Thank you for sharing your legacy.
Thank you.
Your remarkable
Thank
stories.
you. You're quite correct.
Yes, I know it doesn't just happen by luck. I know. I
Correct.
had a few questions I wanted to ask you. One is, you mentioned about the lessons of the Holocaust. What to you are those lessons? And also, do you accept the version of the townspeople that there wasn't anything they could do, and so they're blameless and faultless? It seems like they're saying that they had no culpability, and I'm just wondering if you agree with that, if you accept that, or no. So what are the lessons, and do you agree that they have no fault?
Yeah. Let me start with the second one. I don't agree with that, because you can't have a blind eye when things are coming out of a chimney and say, I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what was going on. I just don't accept that. There's a reason why they don't open up, because they don't want to say anything detrimental that the children or grandchildren might hear and think of them. Now, the first part pertains to, did you say the Holocaust? The stories?
Yeah, I was asking you about the lessons of the Holocaust. And one thing in particular, the people that you described seem very nice and friendly. How was it that such people could allow such monstrous evil? What lessons do you derive from the Holocaust?
The people that I got to see were mostly grandparents, and the offsprings that they produced are the ones I mostly visited. And they tell me that they don't like to talk about their grandparents, and so they are silent. And I don't buy that either. I think if they have a story to tell, they should speak of it, because the children need to know what happened there during those years when the Holocaust was taking place. Go ahead. My wife Phyllis wants to say a word.
The people that we met in Germany, they were Ralph's age at the time when they were children. They were 7 and 8 years old. And so it was their parents and their grandparents that they didn't want people to think that they were Nazis, but maybe they were. And the townspeople, the ones that were nice, the ones who wanted to meet us, they did. The Nazis, the ones who didn't like us, they never came out. They had nothing to do with us. But the old ladies were hanging out of the windows and saying, oh, the Jews are here. The Jews are here. But they never came out to speak with us. But they never caused us any trouble.
Huh.
Ralph, also, do you think that what happened in Germany could happen in the United States? And do you see any warning signs?
The only time I saw some warnings were twice. Once was when Nixon was in power. And the second one, most recently, on January the 6th of this year. I was really scared. I was afraid that the uprising would overtake the Capitol, and that they were going to go after the people who were the leaders there. And I almost told my wife, I'm afraid to look at what is going on here, because it looks so much like what the Nazis were doing in Germany, just taking over the government.
Stop.
Go ahead, Phil.
No, stop.
Don't want to say anything.
That's
Okay. Phyllis knows that when there are disputes, political disputes in particular, that something is going to come off from that. And it brings to mind the horrors that I went through as a child. The burning of the synagogues, the breaking of store windows, etc. It all had a fragment of resemblance to that event of January the 6th. So I don't think it's going to progress any further because they are planning things to prevent that from happening. Whether they do in the future, time will tell. But I don't believe it's going to lead to something of that kind of disaster for this country.
Yeah, Ralph, again, I thank you for your testimony. I encourage you to continue to draw parallels as you see them today, because I agree with you. Probably won't happen, but I'm not quite convinced that it couldn't happen. And I think you have intimated you feel the same way. So keep speaking out, keep doing what you're doing, and Yashar Koach to you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. And you too,
Thank
Phyllis.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Does anybody else want to ask questions? Want to make sure. Hannah, go ahead.
No, but it's very interesting what you just said, because all of us that saw what happened at the Capitol were really, we couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it, and it was scary. But it never dawned on me, Ralph, how it would affect Holocaust survivors.
I'm sure.
Because what they had gone through to see this giant mass of people to do what they did, I mean, I really have to think about it now, because what the Holocaust survivors have gone through, normal things that we are afraid, a little afraid, we don't like what we see, can have such a major effect on you and the rest of the Holocaust survivors. It's very, very interesting. I never thought about it that way, but now I will think about it.
Thank you.
And how
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Some of the people at the Capitol also had a shirt. One had Camp Auschwitz, another one had 6 million wasn't enough. There's quite a bit of anti-Semitism there, which is always whipped up in times like that. And so, yes, we do have to be very cognizant of history and never think. I think one of the lessons of the Holocaust, never think it couldn't happen here. Germany was known or thought to be one of the most civilized, cultured countries on the entire planet, with music and art and science. And people thought before that time it couldn't happen here. So we should never think it couldn't happen here. That's one of the lessons. It could happen anywhere if people are not vigilant.
That's right. Yep.
Thank you. We have a question from Vicky, who I think is either on the phone or go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, I'm here. I just can't get the camera.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It is so touching. I do have a question, Ralph. When you were a child, were you angry at your parents for sending you away? Did you understand why they were sending you away?
That's a really good question, because there are two answers. The first one, I thought it was an act of kindness to spare us from the horrors. But then the other kind of thought that came through me shortly after I was in England, that I felt deserted. I thought they wanted to get rid of me, perhaps, and my sister. My sister was a handful, I must admit, but it worked out quite well for me, because I found out that parents had no choice.
Right. It was an act of love.
If we would have stayed there, we would have been one of the 1.5 million children that were murdered. We would have been part of that statistics.
Yes.
So I thank them from the bottom of my heart and in my prayers that they sent my sister and me to safety. It is really, when I think about it, and I put myself in the shoes of a parent, could I send my kids away? I don't, especially to another country, I have
You never know.
trepidations about trying to answer that question.
It must have been a very difficult, well, actually, maybe it wasn't difficult, because you're saving your children's lives.
That's right, they knew.
You still agonize over it.
Right.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Ralph, I do have one more question for you. And thanks for your indulgence with us. How did the Holocaust and your experiences in it affect your practice of Judaism and your belief in Judaism?
I think it strengthened it. My parents were, I guess, modern Orthodox in those days. And so I grew up in a Jewish home. We had Jewish traditions. We lived it. The synagogue was just down the road, a block. And we were there every weekend and for the high holidays and so forth. And I could still visualize all the accoutrements on the bima, the ark, the parocha, the neotamid. All of those features are still in my mind. I can still see them. And we had a seat near the front of the synagogue there, very close to the bima. And the story goes that the more you contribute, or the wealthier you are, you get seats closer and closer to the Oral Kodesh. And I also remember that the seat could lift up, and the talit and the prayer books, the Chumash, and all those things were in that seat. And therefore, you kind of owned that seat until there was a change made.
And the hostel you went to was Orthodox.
And even the places where I was sent to, the boys' hostel, they were all Orthodox. So my Judaism continued.
You learned.
And the only time I really broke from it was after I graduated from college as a scientist. I started to question, and I over-questioned myself. And I decided that I have to stick to my roots. And therefore I observe kashrut, and I go to services, and I do my tzedakah very regularly and generously.
My synagogue's a little different. In my synagogue, the more money you pay, the farther away from the rabbi you get to stand. That's one of the perks of making contributions. You don't have to sit too close to me. But what kind of scientist are you, Ralph? What kind of science do you do?
I'm an engineer, but I work with a scientist in developing satellites that predict the weather. So that's
Very
my
nice.
specialty, working with the scientists, developing science that measures the atmosphere, the cloud cover, the temperature, winds, and so forth. And it's been getting better and better each year that I was working. And so now it's about 97% accurate. And NOAA, of course, uses that data to make their forecasts from it.
Yeah. My dad used to tell the story about the parent who said to his kid, you better stop lying, because if you don't stop lying, you're going to grow up to become a weather forecaster.
Yeah.
But now, though, you're right, the weather forecasts are much more accurate. And at our synagogue, we actually merged Judaism and science. So you might want to check out what we do on a Shabbat. I think you'd find it kind of interesting. But
Love to, yes.
all I can tell you, Ralph, is keep eating well, stay healthy, keep speaking out, and you're a blessing to our people and to the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you again, Ralph, from the bottom of our hearts for sharing your time with us on this Yom HaShoah and sharing your life, because I know that's very private, but you laid it all out there for all of us. And we are very grateful that you came to L'Dor Va-Dor tonight to share your story with us. Because as you know, every day we're losing many Holocaust survivors. So to have your story firsthand means a great deal to all of us, to me especially.
Yes.
And I thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Yeah,
And thank
thank
you
you.
all for attending today. Thank you, Ralph, for being with us, and thank all of you who observed Yom HaShoah and listened to Ralph's story firsthand. I really am very appreciative of this evening, and it's very moving and emotional for me. Thank you.